Who doesn't love a good science fiction film? If you are a connoisseur of such stories, you may think that some of these films' scientific bends must be based on truth, right? As it turns out, even the most convincing and realistic scientific ideas in sci-fi are often not based in reality. Of course, most of us can pick apart the truth from fiction in movies, and most of us did not think that Predator was real or that space travel was as easy as getting into a rocket and taking off. However, some of the simplest ideas in science fiction are often not as realistic as you may think. Keep watching to hear more about the myths that sci-fi has convinced you are based on actual science. The first non-factual fact that sci-fi movies love to perpetuate is that lasers can be multicolored and appear as beams of colored light. Lasers burning holes in walls or people is a classic sci-fi trope, but if you have ever used a laser pointer during a presentation or playing with a pet, you may have initially been surprised to find that the laser only provides a dot on whatever surface it lands on. There is no red beam or light leading to the dot. What gives? If you're super bummed about this, fret not. You can manipulate a laser pointer to give a visible beam of light. Because the light is scattered when it comes into contact with particles of matter, you can shine your laser through a handful of dust, ash, or anything similar. You may have seen this effect before if you've ever shown a flashlight through a dusty room. However, to get that magnificent colored beam of light in the dark or outside, you'll simply have to watch movies. A laser would not be visible in space where many sci-fi movies take place. That's because there isn't any air in outer space. Did you know about this one, or the trick you can use to make the laser more visible? Speaking of lasers, did you know that you cannot see lasers in space and wouldn't be able to hear them either? This is again because there is no air in outer space. In order for sound to travel through the eardrums, there must first be vibration. Objects create vibrations when they move together. Our ears then collect the data, which is sent to the brain and interpreted as an audible sound. With no air, the vibrations cannot travel to the ear. Otolaryngologist, an ear, throat, and nose specialist, Dr. Medicide, explains this phenomenon. The eardrum is a paper-thin layer of a membrane that essentially vibrates as soon as sound waves hit it, very similar to a drum. All of this is to say that the sound that a laser would make would not be audible in space. The next myth we have to discuss is that the events of Jurassic Park could never be replicated. While much of the science in this story is obviously fabricated, the one sample of dinosaur genetic code would provide enough information to create clones of all of those species of dinosaurs. The dubious explanation of how they were able to escape and how that millionaire was able to keep that island a secret were all questionable explanations, but still fun to suspend our disbelief for. However, there was one thing that many of us did believe, that amber could preserve a DNA sample. The way the book and the film present this idea seems airtight. A mosquito sucked up some blood from a dinosaur. The mosquito then gets trapped in some amber, and the fossilized remains contain that ancient blood sample. In real life, researchers have attempted to suspend genetic code in similar mediums. Sadly, preserving these samples in amber or any type of sap did not preserve the DNA any more than a fossilized insect carcass that was only 60 years old did. Well, this story serves as a warning anyway, so we shouldn't be too bent out of shape for this not being scientifically accurate. That's not the only thing Michael Crichton and Steven Spielberg fooled us on with Jurassic Park. Lots of people remember the classic line about staying perfectly still so that the T-Rex wouldn't see you. But is that true? If there really was a T-Rex in front of you, would freezing in place really save your life? As it turns out, no. In 1993, a researcher called Kent Stevens decided to test this out. It is true that T-Rexes were not exactly blessed by natural selection. Think of their little tiny arms. However, their eyesight was not as bad as the film would have you believe. Scientists used scale models of what dinosaur heads would have looked like as accurately as possible and measured their depth perception perception. By doing this, he was able to get close to understanding what their perspective would have looked like. T-Rexes did have an overlapping field of vision from both eyes, which faced forward and were quite large. This makes it nearly impossible that they would have been vision impaired in the way the film describes them. In fact, they would have had vision that was over 10 times as sharp as a human's vision. Sorry, Spielberg, that dino would have seen Jeff Goldblum and his friends that day. Have you ever seen an action movie? They would have us believe that being hit with a shotgun bullet would kill you and launch you several yards. As cool as that is to see on screen, it's wildly inaccurate. Due to Newton's third law of motion, for every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. In this case, that means that if a person was really launched, like that from being shot, the same action would be enacted on the shooter. That's why many people have described a kick or buck from their guns after shooting them. The bullet will slow down before hitting its target. The trajectory of a bullet shot from a gun will not fly directly into space in one long, straight line. Instead, it slows down each second it is airborne, allowing the bullet to roughly follow the Earth's curvature. This means that the shooter of the gun would feel the full effects of this equal and opposite reaction, as stated in Newton's law. If Hollywood wanted to make these scenes more accurate, they would show us the shooter flying back farther than the actual victim. Remember when we talked about there not being any air in outer space? Well, this fact is just going to ruin your whole day. Unlike what we often see in action and sci-fi movies, this means that explosions would not look the way they do in, say, Star Wars. Because of Earth's atmosphere, our pesky air, fireballs and explosions are somewhat slowed down. This allows us to see what would otherwise be a split-second affair, with no fire, no sound, and no light. Boring. Why do we even want to go to space anyway? All of the cool stuff is here. Hollywood has also tricked all of us into being terrified of someone chloroforming us. We've all seen movies where the dastardly villain holds a chemically soaked handkerchief over a woman's face, rendering her unconscious after just a breath or two. The reason we don't see this on the news every single day is because chloroform simply doesn't work that way. If you were going to knock someone out with chloroform, it would take much longer than a few seconds. While it does have the ability to render someone unconscious, it takes about 4 to 5 minutes for the effects to kick in. If someone already had their victim restrained, they may be able to use this chemical in this way. But as for sneaking up on someone and using a rag to instantly incapacitate them, simply not possible. Researchers do believe that chloroform, due to its use as an anesthetic in the early 1900s, was in fact used as a weapon back then. It was pretty easy to come by, and those who knew how to use it would certainly have been able to do so. In fact, we believe that there have been some serial killers who used chloroform as their preferred method of knocking out their victims. If you've seen Jaws, especially as a young person, you may have had a period in your life where you were terrified that scraping a foot or thigh on some coral would attract a shark almost immediately while in the ocean. Some people believe that a shark can smell just one drop of blood from miles away. Others believed that just being in a boat near a drop of blood from anything would be a death sentence. Researchers tested this claim. Sharks were found to be able to detect a drop of blood in a space that is roughly about the size of a swimming pool. When thinking of that scale and applying it to the whole ocean, a shark would need to be very close by already to smell that one drop of blood. Just to be safe though, let's all agree not to test this theory, just in case. Finally, the last myth we have to discuss is a much more amusing thought, that quicksand will swallow you whole, and the vengeful sand will work even harder to do so if you struggle. It seems like a cruel joke that this substance would be allowed to exist, right? Well, while quicksand does exist, the physics just don't add up. If sand is mixed with equal parts water, it creates a sort of sludge that we call quicksand. It really will cause objects to sink, but density is a huge factor here. The human body is not as dense as the actual sand. So, while you may sink a bit, your whole body will not be fully consumed as is shown on TV. So what is the best way to escape if you do find yourself stuck? Have a friend add more water. This will dilute it and allow the sand particles to loosen up. However, you will leave there absolutely covered in sandy mud. Maybe sinking would have been better. Did you know about these common misconceptions? Are there any Hollywood myths that we didn't mention here? We would love to hear your thoughts down below. And don't forget to like and subscribe.